Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Aurora online classes. Dear students, I'll proceed with the same lesson, footprints without feet. Let's go ahead. In my previous class, I taught you that Griffin was a brilliant scientist. He was really an extraordinary scientist. But this Griffin misused the discovery of invisibility. He misused his knowledge of science. He did not use his discovery for the well-being of humanity, for the welfare of society, for the welfare of human beings. So, and actually he had discovered that a man could be invisible. Invisible means one who cannot be seen, जिसे देखा नहीं जा सकता है. In Hindi, अदृश्य. Someone you can't see, this is called invisible. So he had discovered that humans could be invisible, but he did not use this discovery for the good of humanity. And he was a lawless person. He did everything against the law. He did not obey the law. He was Griffin. And let's go further. Can a man become invisible? This is the story of a scientist. And what is the name of the scientist? Griffin, who discovers how to make himself invisible. He discovered that how to make himself invisible. Does he use or misuse his discovery? Of course, I taught you in my previous class that he misused his discovery. Let's go ahead. The two boys started in surprise at the fresh muddy imprints of a pair of barefoot. What was a barefooted man doing on the steps of a house in the middle of London? And where was the man? As they gazed, a remarkable sight met their eyes. A fresh footmark appeared from nowhere. Further footprints followed one after another, descending their steps and progressing down the street. The boys followed, fascinated, until the muddy impressions became fainter and fainter and at last disappeared altogether. This is the incident that took place in London. And actually the two boys started in surprise. The two boys were surprised to see the muddy imprints. Imprints means impression, nisan, of a pair of barefoot. They were the muddy imprints, muddy impression. They were the muddy footmarks, and they were surprised to see the footmarks made by someone, and the person who had made the footmarks, he was not visible. So really it was a great surprise for them. So these boys followed the footprints, muddy footprints, and they followed the muddy footprints, and they were so much surprised to know as to what that barefooted means one who is without feet. One who is without feet is called barefooted, nange pair, khali pair. So what was a barefooted man doing on the steps of a house? So that these two boys found the footmarks of a barefooted man on the steps of a house, and they followed his footmarks. And they followed his footmarks up to some distance, and they found that these footmarks were getting fainter. These footmarks were getting defaced, and they went a little ahead and they found that then there was no sign of footmarks. The footmarks had disappeared. So they wanted to know exactly as to who is making the footmarks, and the man was not visible there. So this was the invisible man, and invisible man was none other than Griffin, because Griffin had discovered to make himself disappear, to make himself transparent, or to make himself invisible. So they followed it, and they were fascinated, they got attracted towards it, and they started taking in the impressions, and they followed the impressions, they followed the footmarks of that barefooted man. They followed the footmarks up to some distance, and then they found that there was no trace of the footmarks anymore. The footmarks had disappeared. So they were quite fascinated. And actually, the explanation of the mystery was really simple enough. The bewildered boys, they were confused. Bewildered means confused. The bewildered boys had been following a scientist who had just discovered how to make the human body transparent. Actually, these two boys were following the footmarks of the scientist, and this scientist had just discovered as to how to become invisible, and there was no trace of the scientist. Actually, you can see the scientist when the scientist is naked. On being naked, one cannot see the scientist. If the scientist is naked, nobody can see. The scientist remains invisible. Nobody can see the scientist if the scientist is naked. Means if the scientist is without his clothes, nobody can see the scientist. But when the scientist puts on some clothes, he could be seen. So Griffin the scientist, what was the name of this scientist? Griffin. This story is from a very famous novel, that is The Invisible Man. Griffin the scientist had carried out experiment after experiment to prove that the human body could become invisible. Finally, he swallowed certain rare drugs, and his body became as transparent as a sheet of glass, though it also remained as solid as glass. Actually, what had happened? Undoubtedly, Griffin was a brilliant scientist who did experiment after experiment, means who did so many experiments, and finally this Griffin discovered as to how one could become invisible. And in fact, this Griffin, this scientist, had taken some rare drugs, and just because of the effect of some rare drugs, he became invisible, he became transparent. But actually his body was as transparent as a sheet of glass, that was solid. The body was solid, but he was invisible. Only in clothes he could be seen. But if he is without clothes, if he is naked, nobody can see the scientist. So this is what he discovered. Brilliant scientist though he was, Griffin was rather a lawless person. Lawless means one who breaks the law. One who does not obey the law is called a lawless person. If you commit a theft, if you steal, or if you rob someone, robbery, beating, creating violence, creating chaos, disturbing human beings, threatening or giving troubles to human beings is against crime. So anything which is against crime, and one who does anything against the law is a lawless person. And it was not expected, such a thing was not expected, such a crime was not expected from a great scientist like Griffin. So it is said that Griffin was rather a lawless person. His landlord disliked him and tried to eject him. mean throw him out, nikal dena. In revenge, Griffin set fire to the house. This is an example of being lawless. Lawless means one who doesn't obey the law, one who doesn't abide by the law, the rule and regulation of a country is called a lawless. So, in revenge, Griffin set fire to the house to get away without being seen. He had to remove his clothes. Thus, it was that he became a homeless wanderer, underline it, without clothes, without money, and quite invisible, until he happened to step in some mud and left footprints as he walked. He was a brilliant scientist, and his landlord did not like him. His landlord was also fed up with Griffin. Means Griffin's landlord was fed up with him. He did not like him. And that is why he wanted that scientist to leave his house. So he demanded money from the scientist. The scientist was quite eccentric, very strange man. बहुत अजीबोगरीब, बहुत पागल जैसा. Brilliant scientist, and actually he was a lawless person. And what happened? The landlord was fed up with him. The landlord did not like Griffin. So in revenge, Griffin set his house on fire and he ran away from there. It is quite certain that landlord might have chased him. That is why he played a trick. This Griffin played a trick. The Griffin could become invisible, and Griffin could become invisible when he was without any cloth. So Griffin removed all his clothes and became bare-bodied. And when he became bare-bodied without any clothes, he became naked, and then on being naked, Griffin was invisible. And this is the way, and this is the trick he played upon to become invisible. As long as he is in clothes, people could see him. So when he is without clothes, nobody can see him. And he took the undue advantage of being invisible. So he ran away from there. He removed all his clothes to be invisible. And now he became a homeless wanderer. Wanderer means one who roams here and there. He became homeless. He did not have any house to live in. He did not have any money. Money was needed for him for his survival. So he needed clothes, he needed money, and he needed a house to live in. So he started moving around in the streets of London. And that is why, while doing so, until he happened to step in some mud. What happened? When he ran away from there, he stepped into some mud. And as soon as he stepped into some mud, and when he stepped into mud, and when he came out from there, he started making some footmarks. That is why these are the footmarks, these are the muddy footmarks that the scientist made, and these two boys were surprised to see the footmarks without the maker of the footmarks, because the maker of the footmarks, I mean the scientist, was invisible. Nobody could see him. So actually he stepped into some mud, kichad, and just because of his stepping into the mud, he left muddy footmarks without being visible. He was not visible at all. And these two boys, they saw him. He escaped easily enough from the boys who followed his footprints in London. He escaped from there. But his adventures were by no means over. He had chosen a bad time of the year to wander about London without clothes. Now he was wandering around in the streets of London without clothes, and he was invisible. He was invisible when he is without clothes. Once he puts on clothes, he would be visible. So now he saved himself while running away from there. removed all his clothes, he became invisible, and by being invisible, he was safe. And he has started roaming here and there in the streets of London. And that was a bad time for him. Why was it a bad time? Because that was bitterly cold in the month of mid-Jan. That was the month of mid-Jan, and without clothes, without clothes, he was feeling extremely cold. A strong wind was blowing, bitterly cold wind was blowing, and he was succumbed to the bitterly cold wind. He was tolerating, he was enduring everything. He was feeling too much cold because he was without clothes. So he was in great distress. He was in great distress. He was in great pain as he was without clothes. He was feeling really very cold, extremely cold, as he was without clothes. He had no money. He had no clothes. He had no house to live in. So he had chosen a bad time. That's why it is said that a bad time. It is not a favorable time for him. Of the year, London without clothes, it was midwinter. It was midwinter. Underline it. The air was bitterly cold and he could not do without clothes. Instead of walking about the streets, he decided to slip into a big London store for warmth. Now he decided to get into a big store, a big London store, supermarket, super store, in order to get some clothes from there. In London, there are so many supermarkets, and in London there are so many super shops where everything is available. Just like we have everything in a mall, because in a mall we have different sections. We have the sections we have the sections for clothes. We have the sections for toys. We have the sections for we have the section for some electronics. We have the section. We have also restaurant in a supermarket, in a super shop. So there are so many sections of a there are so many sections of a super shop, supermarket. So he decided, now he wanted clothes to warm himself, because that was the mid month of January and it was bitterly cold. He needed some warm clothes to keep himself warm. So he decided to get into some London store. Closing time arrived as soon as the doors were shut. Griffin was able to give himself the pleasure of clothing and feeding himself without regard to expense. He broke open boxes and wrappers and fitted himself out with warm clothes. Soon, with shoes and overcoat and a wide-brimmed hat, he became a fully dressed and visible person. In the kitchen of the restaurant, he found cold meat and coffee, and he followed up the meal with sweets and wine taken from the grocery store. Finally, he settled down to sleep on a pile of pills. What did he do? He got into a big London store, big shop, in order to get some warm clothes. He went there, and actually he was invisible. So he took the advantage of being invisible. He got inside it and he fitted himself out with some warm clothes. He opened the boxes. He broke open the boxes and wrappers and fitted himself out with some warm cloths. So he came out with some shoes, an overcoat, wide brimmed hat, and he became a fully dressed man. So when he dressed up, he became visible. And then in that section of the super shop, there was a restaurant, and in that kitchen he found cold meat. He enjoyed cold meat, coffee. He ate cold meat. He enjoyed coffee. He drank coffee, and he also followed up the meal with some sweets and wine from the grocery. There was a grocery section in that super bazaar, or you can say supermarket, or you can say super shop. That was a London store, big London store, just like a supermarket. So he got everything. He got warm clothes from the supermarket, from the London store. He got warm clothes from there. Then and what were the warm clothes? Like shoes, overcoat, hat. He was fully dressed. Now he was visible. And he also enjoyed cold meat, coffee, sweets, wine, everything. And then he slept on a pile of quilts. Quilt means rajai, isn't it? So he slept in the store. Finally he settled down to sleep on a pile of quilts. He slept on a pile of quilts. There were so many pile of quilts. So he's just like pile of blankets, one by one. One was kept on another. One was kept on the other, like that. Pile of quilts. So he had everything, and actually he had everything, and he slept on the pile of quilts. And he might have thought that before nobody was there, the store was empty, no man was there, no staff was there, and he slept there. If only Griffin had managed to wake up in good time, all might have been well. As it was, he did not wake up until the assistants were already arriving next morning. Next morning, what happened? The assistant, the staff of the shop, the staff of the store came next morning, and since he was wearing clothes, warm clothes, the staff of the shop, the staff of the store saw him. When he saw a couple of them, who saw? Now he saw. Griffin saw that two staff had entered the London store, because that was the morning time and he kept on sleeping till morning. He didn't wake up early in the morning, so he was caught there. Next morning, when the when the servants of that store came, they opened the store and they found that Griffin was sleeping there. Griffin saw these two men and he panicked. He was afraid of, and he began to run from there. Then when the staff of the store saw him, they started chasing him. In the end, he was able to escape only by quickly taking off his newly found clothes. Now what did he do? Again he took off all his clothes, because he was being chased by the staff of the London store. And then what did he do? He took off all his clothes there and ran away. Because once he took off all his clothes, he would become invisible. So once more, he found himself invisible but naked in the chill January air. So he ran away from there. This time he decided to try the stock of a theatrical company, means some theater. A stock of a theatrical company in the hope of finding not only clothes but also something that would hide the empty space above his shoulders. Shivering with cold, he hurried to Drury Lane, the center of the theatre world. Now he decided to get inside the stock of the store of a theatrical company. Theatrical means drama, theatre. And now he was feeling cold. It was the month of January, mid-month of January. He was shivering, he was trembling, and he needed some clothes to protect his body from bitterly cold wind, from cold. So he went to the Drury Lane, and this Drury Lane is the center of the theatre world. This was the center. So he got inside in the shop. He soon found a suitable shop. He made his way invisible upstairs and came out a little later wearing bandages round his forehead, dark glasses, false nose, big bushy side whiskers, and a large hat. Now he got inside. Griffin got inside in a shop in the Drury Lane, and Drury Lane is the center of the theatre world. He got inside, and from there he got bandages in the Drury. From a shop in the Drury Lane, he got some props. Props are used by the actors in a drama, like fake mustache, like fake teeth, like fake face, like fake wig. They are the props. So he got inside a shop to get all these things. So what did he do? He put on bandages around his forehead, It is about he had to protect, he had to hide above the shoulder, means this face, the whole face. So what did he do? He put on bandages around his forehead. From where? From the sock in a dreary lane. Then he put on dark glasses, false nose, and big bushy side whiskers. Side whiskers, whiskers first. He put on all these things. These are the props that he put on, and also a large hat. So to escape without being seen, he carelessly attacked, and now he was ready. Second time he was ready, and he came out. He came out wearing bandages, whiskers, hat, glasses, false nose, everything. He came out with all these props. He was wearing all the props, and he wanted to go away from there without being noticed, without being seen. So he came across a shopkeeper there. So he attacked that shopkeeper. Griffin attacked that shopkeeper and robbed him of his money. Griffin took his money and ran away from there. So dear students, after which he robbed him all the money he could find. So he robbed that shopkeeper. He attacked that shopkeeper and he looted all his money and ran away from there. Dear students, that's all for today. Till now we have seen that though he was a great scientist, he was an extraordinary scientist, but he misused his discovery. He misused his discovery to threaten the people, to commit theft. As he had committed theft, he robbed that shopkeeper of his money. As the story goes on, we shall come to know that he misused his discovery. He did not use the power of discovery for the well-being of the people. He misused it. He misused the knowledge of his science. So thank you very much. That's all for today, my dear students. Till then, be happy. Keep practicing.